Did you know the world is living on borrowed money? I'm not just talking about your credit card or a mortgage. I'm talking about everyone. Individuals, companies, entire countries. Right now, total global debt is estimated at over 300 trillion US dollars. That number is so huge, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. To put it in perspective, it has more than 3 times the value of everything produced in the entire world in a single year. So, how on earth did we get here? How did we rack up a bill this massive? Believe it or not, debt didn't start as a problem. Originally, it was a tool for progress. Governments borrowed to build roads, ports, schools, and armies. Businesses borrowed to expand factories and hire more workers. Families borrowed to buy homes and improve their lives. In many ways, debt was the fuel that helped economies grow faster than they ever could with just cash on hand. But over time, something changed. Borrowing became easier, cheaper, and almost limitless. After World War II, many countries rebuilt their shattered economies using debt. This was manageable because their economies were booming. But the real turning point came in the 1970s. The global financial system made a huge shift away from money backed by gold. Once currencies were no longer tied to a physical asset like gold, governments could print money much more freely. This made borrowing incredibly easy and incredibly tempting. Central banks started lowering interest rates to encourage economic activity. This flood of cheap money was like an open invitation for governments to spend more than they earned. Instead of making tough choices like raising taxes or cutting spending, they just borrowed. Year after year, running a budget deficit became the new normal. So who's the biggest borrower of them all? The United States. The US government alone owes over $30 trillion. But it's not alone. Other major economies like Japan, China, and European nations are also carrying massive debts. Japan's government debt, for instance, is more than 2.5 times the size of its entire economy, one of the highest ratios in the world. But government debt is only one piece of this giant puzzle. Corporations have also been on a borrowing spree, especially after the 2008 financial crisis. When central banks slashed interest rates to near zero, companies saw a golden opportunity. They could borrow money for next to nothing. But many didn't use this debt to invest in new technologies or build new factories. Instead, they used it to buy back their own shares, which boosts stock prices, or to acquire their competitors. And of course, households piled on debt too. Mortgages, student loans, credit cards, auto loans, personal debt has exploded, particularly in developed countries. In some nations, the total amount of household debt is now larger than the country's entire annual economic output. It's a staggering amount of IOUs. This leads to a critical question. If everyone is borrowing, who is lending all this money? Well, a huge portion of global debt is owed to institutions we rely on every day: banks, pension funds, and insurance companies. It's also owed to other governments, central banks, and private investors. For instance, governments often owe money to their own citizens through bonds. Countries also owe money to each other. China and Japan, for example, own trillions of dollars of US government debt. In a strange way, the world essentially owes money to itself. One country's massive debt is another country's valuable asset. One person's loan is another person's investment. It's a complex, interconnected web. And that brings us to the $300 trillion question. Can the world ever actually pay this debt back? The honest answer is no. Not in the traditional sense, anyway. If every government on Earth suddenly tried to repay its debt in full, the global economy would collapse. Taxes would have to skyrocket to unimaginable levels. Government spending on everything from healthcare to infrastructure would grind to a halt, and economic growth would simply disappear. So, instead of paying it off, the global system relies on a different strategy: rolling over the debt. It's like paying off one credit card with another. Old debt is constantly being paid off with new debt. As long as economies keep growing and interest rates stay low and manageable, this system can keep going. This is precisely why the total world debt keeps growing every single year. New borrowing always outpaces repayments. But this is a risky game. When interest rates are low, carrying a lot of debt feels painless. But what happens when rates go up? Suddenly, the cost of servicing that debt explodes. We've seen this happen recently as inflation surged globally. Central banks were forced to raise interest rates, and suddenly, that cheap debt became very expensive. Governments have to spend more of their budget just paying interest, leaving less for everything else. Companies struggle to refinance their loans, and households feel the squeeze through higher mortgage and credit card payments. There's another, quieter way that debt gets reduced: inflation. When prices rise across the board, the real value of existing debt falls. Think about it. Governments can repay old debts with money that is worth less than when they borrowed it. This has happened many times throughout history. It's one of the hidden reasons why a little bit of inflation is often tolerated and sometimes even encouraged by governments. Of course, there's a more dramatic outcome: default. When a country's debt becomes completely unbearable, sometimes it simply stops paying. History is full of these sovereign defaults. Argentina, Greece, and many other nations have gone through devastating debt crises. In these situations, the lenders take huge losses, the country's currency collapses, and the standard of living for its citizens plummets. So, is this $300 trillion mountain of global debt a ticking time bomb waiting to explode? It depends on who you ask. Debt itself isn't inherently evil. When used productively to invest in things that create future growth, it can be a powerful tool. The real danger is when debt grows much faster than the ability to repay it. When borrowing is used to fund consumption instead of productivity, we are essentially weakening our own future. Today, the world is more dependent on debt than ever before. The entire system survives not by paying the debt off, but by carefully managing it, by keeping rates low, extending payment deadlines, letting inflation chip away at its value, and, most importantly, by trusting that the economy will continue to grow. The uncomfortable truth is that global debt will likely never stop growing. The system is designed that way. So the real question isn't whether the debt will ever be paid back. The real question is whether our confidence in the system will remain. As long as people believe that governments can manage their debts, that currencies will hold their value, and that markets will stay calm, the system holds together. But when that belief breaks, history shows us that consequences can be swift and severe. And that is why the total world debt isn't just a mind-boggling number. It's both the foundation of our modern global economy and its single biggest risk. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. See you next time.